Good afternoon. Thanks everyone for joining. My name is Michael Del Castillo, senior editor at Forbes, where I help oversee our blockchain and cryptocurrency coverage. Here with the esteemed Emin Gün Sirer, former academic who became a CEO of a very influential blockchain company that created the AVAX blockchain. And the Avalanche blockchain, the AVAX cryptocurrency, now valued at roughly $8 billion. Thank you so much for joining us today, Emin.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael. It's been a long time since we chatted face to face.
Our knowing each other goes back to roughly 2016, when the notorious, infamous DAO happened. Oh, yeah. And I do want to talk a little bit about that, but because Forbes Talks has an opportunity to go into a little bit more depth, we want to go back even further to get us started. So if you could start us off, where were you born? And tell us a little bit about mom and dad.
Okay, so I was born in Istanbul, Turkey, and I was a geeky kid, grew up in Turkey, and there isn't that much I want to get into about the mom and dad story, but okay. I will get into something that is actually relevant to what happened.
Yeah.
So my family, like many others who are listening, is a family that was displaced.
Yeah.
So I grew up in Istanbul. My parents grew up in another city, and their parents grew up in yet another city. And many of those migrations were forced. And I grew up, with stories from my grandparents where they had lived in a certain area for a long time, for about 500 years. And one day people came and said, "Hey, your neighbors are gearing up to come and kill you all." And so they had to just walk into the street, and they walked for 2 days until they felt safe enough, and they settled there. And so I grew up with my grandmother telling us about, we left this and we left the breakfast on the table. That really hurt her. Yeah. And the whole time we're like, "Grandma, you didn't just leave the breakfast. You also left the table it's on. You left the house it's in. You left the land it's on. Everything they had, they left behind." And boy, it would have been nice if they had a USB stick back in the day where they could carry at least a little bit of their wealth with them. And it wasn't possible. And that really was in our collective consciousness growing up.
Tell me a little bit about how that experience and having those stories be told to you as you were growing up sort of informed some of your career choices and your early steps into academia.
Sure. Let's see, I grew up, with this feeling that records are records, and they can change at any time. They're in the hands of other people. They're in the hands of people who are gatekeepers. They're in the hands of people who possess power. And at any time, things can happen with zero control of your own. I lived through 3 different devaluations where the money lost value by about 30% overnight. Mm-hmm. And so those are all parts of growing up. So, in the West, we are incredibly privileged that we haven't had to live through any one of these in a long time.
And when you say grew up, so we're talking about devaluations in Turkey.
Overnight. And, you think your family has so much wealth, and suddenly it's 1/3 of it is gone. And it's just a very different feeling. I remember trying to buy books. I got into a very good high school. Mm-hmm. So you have to take a big placement exam, and if you're in the top 110, you get to go to this American school. So that's how I ended up on the career path towards the U.S. And I remember trying to buy these books. The books come from the U.S., so you have to pay hard dollar for it. And it was so hard, right? It's like, you have to pay the tuition, plus the cost of books, I remember, was actually, was taxing. So that's how I grew up.
So how did you go about solving that problem of paying for the books in dollars?
Well, back in those days, we had capital controls. It wasn't even easy to convert cash into from one form to another. So, I don't think I need to belabor the point, but crypto gives power to the individuals. I think that's the key. The trade from one asset to another asset is at your leisure, can happen without an intermediary. You don't have to go and beg somebody to do a service for you.
So with that kind of experience growing up and the educational opportunities that you had to learn, You could have gone a lot of ways. I can imagine some folks going, maybe becoming historians to try and prevent that from happening again. I can imagine some folks going into politics to maybe try and take a role on that side of the problems. You ended up becoming a computer scientist.
Right.
What is it about computer science that inspired you to think that this was possibly an appropriate reaction for that history that you have?
Oh, that's a complicated question, and this is turning into a therapy session, which I love. A good therapy session with a good friend is always fun. So I think the main thing that drove me to computer science was the desire, or also the ability, to be able to build a world that is entirely your own. It's a field that doesn't really require that much capital, right? Compared to, suppose you do electrical engineering on the high end on power systems, you have to work at a big company, right? You have to work at Westinghouse, and you have to have billions of dollars of wires and transformers and so on. If you think about other forms of science, they all require a lot of capital. Computer science, with just a laptop, you can build software that changes the world. It transforms the universe as we know it. So that appealed to me. And also, the second thing is that it was very challenging. So when I was growing up, we did not know how to build reliable systems that work. This was really hard.
We being society, humanity
in general. Yeah. I think the listeners will, those of them that are old enough, will know about the days when you would go up to the bank teller and there'd be a blue screen, or they'd say, the systems are down, come back in another hour or so. Or you go to the airport and there's a whole bunch of blue screens, on the displays. I mean, these were like, this was a daily occurrence. Whatever. There's like students coming up to me saying, my computer crashed, I lost my homework. Daily occurrence, and you don't know who's lying. Obviously, some of them are, but there is a genuine possibility of data loss. We did not know how to build a reliable system that stood up.
So I'm glad you mentioned the students. When I first crossed paths with your work, you were still a professor at Cornell. Are you still a professor today, technically?
No, I'm not.
You are not. Okay.
I stepped down about a year ago.
Okay. So this was roughly 2016. Tell me what you were doing professionally, and sort of like, was that the moment when you kind of discovered crypto, or did that happen before you were a professor?
Way before. Okay. So here's the story. So I grew up in Turkey. I went to Princeton. I was a very good student at this American high school, so I ended up getting a nice scholarship. And after Princeton, I wanted to continue my studies. I went to the University of Washington, got my doctorate. And I was always drawn to large, complex systems. So when I got out of my doctorate program and started at Cornell University as a professor, one of the biggest problems was, this is 2002, one of the biggest problems was how to build large peer-to-peer networks.
Yeah.
And at the time, there was file sharing. It was rampant. And in file sharing networks, a lot of people wanted to take resources and nobody wanted to donate resources. Everyone wants to download. Nobody wants to upload the hot items. So what do you do? And, there are lots of different approaches to this. People might have heard of BitTorrent, which is a barter system. But barter systems aren't that good, because if you don't have anything, and in the beginning you have nothing, right? If you don't have anything, it's very hard to bootstrap yourself. So my idea back then, this is 2002, 7 years before the Satoshi white paper, the idea was, let me build a cryptocurrency without a central bank, without a central mint, where you mint the coin by proof of work. The system was called Karma. It was published in 2003. And so it did not have all of the features of Bitcoin. So let's be clear. I'm not claiming credit. And in fact,
are you Satoshi Nakamoto?
I am not Satoshi Nakamoto.
Okay.
And he had an idea that was on top of the Karma idea by an important step.
What was the one thing that he had that Karma didn't?
He ended up folding the consensus process into the proof of work minting. So I was just minting, but keeping track of the consensus using a traditional consensus mechanism. He ended up combining the two to come up with a new consensus mechanism, which was groundbreaking at the time. So I did that before, I did the minting about 7 years ahead of time. And then later on, when Bitcoin came up, I looked into Bitcoin. 2016, DAO hack would be way late for me.
Yeah,
I was there before. So in 2013, Itai Eyal was a postdoc at Cornell, and the two of us started looking into Bitcoin. And the question was, okay, well, this thing is obviously amazing, and there are a bunch of claims made around it. None of the claims come with proofs. And in that business, in this line of work, if something doesn't have a proof, you have to view it as suspect. So we thought, okay, well, let's see if we can prove for the reasons why this thing is working, or maybe it's incorrect. and we discovered the biggest known flaw in Bitcoin. It's something called selfish mining.
Yeah.
When we announced it in 2014, it was incredibly unexpected. It violated some of the things that Satoshi had directly claimed and said those are wrong. One of the main things Satoshi said was Bitcoin is safe as long as a majority is honest, and that is incorrect. And
for those that don't know, very briefly, if you can try, for lay folks, trying to describe what is selfish mining.
Sure. Selfish mining is a protocol that is very much like the Bitcoin protocol, but isn't exactly what Satoshi told you to do. So if you follow the protocol that Satoshi told you to do, then Bitcoin works well. Okay. But you don't have to. It's at your discretion. And these systems are supposed to operate in a way that no matter what you might want to do, they will still hold up. And so we showed that there's something else you can do when you discover blocks. In particular, you don't just collaboratively offer them to the public like a chump. You start doing something more clever. You start holding them behind your back, and you reveal them only when you need to in order to invalidate the work that others did. So other people are trying to come up with proofs of work. You are holding your proofs of work private, and you're revealing them in order to slam dunk other people who did parallel work to you. And by doing so, we showed that you can make more money than your fair share as a miner.
What was the result of that paper?
Oh, death threats.
Really?
Of course, death threats, invective, attacks, which it came as a surprise to me. We weren't expecting that.
Here you are teaching at a nice university, nice peaceful classes, writing some papers, doing some academic research. All of a sudden, death threats.
Absolutely, and. Also, Cornell is receiving letters about how I'm a terrible professor, that they should fire me, etc. I had tenure, of course, and I was like, okay, whatever. We just smiled at those. But then the other thing that the community did was they funded multiple projects to prove us wrong. And so suddenly...
The community being users of Bitcoin.
Yeah, Bitcoin users.
Okay.
It's the maxis, etc. They all got together. They're very irate, right? So the protocol seems like it has a weakness. Their God, chosen God, seems like maybe he's not so infallible after all. Maybe there are people who are finding flaws with what he did. And so how could that be, right? And so since that cannot be, let's fund an effort to show these idiotic academics wrong. Every single one of those projects to show us wrong started out, collected money, started out, built some software to try to prove us wrong, and then turned around and said, what these guys said is exactly right.
Oh no!
And so it was great. Actually, I have to give credit to those in the early days.
Did anything change, like from a code perspective, or is this still like an ongoing thing?
This is an ongoing thing. Okay. So Bitcoin decided to handle this issue called selfish mining at the social layer. So since we revealed our paper, the community has been incredibly careful about not having any mining pools exceed the dangerous thresholds. The threshold used to be taken as 51%. It's not. It's 33%. So you don't see miners bigger than 33%. You haven't seen them in many, many years. So people are cognizant of the fact that if a miner reaches that level, it begins to become a threat.
So this paper resulted in changes not at the code level with Bitcoin, but at the social level. It was in the users of Bitcoin's best interest not to go over this 33% number. And so they kind of agreed to not do this informally, but as far as we know publicly, they did that.
Absolutely. Michael, also, let me also interject and add, over time, I would say over the course of maybe a year or so, I have to give credit to even the maxis at the time.
Yeah,
they turned around and they realized, okay, yeah, this guy is right, and science works this way. You can't avoid it; it's right in front of you. And they started inviting me to all the conferences and so forth. And they realized, okay, these people are not out to destroy anything of value. They're here to characterize the security of the system and make it better.
So I'm going to take that transition to right before something that we eventually started to call the DAO hack. The DAO, Distributed Autonomous Organization, technically supposed to be one of many. These are organizations that have governance whereby users can decide what this code base is going to do. without as much reliance on central authority. But the first one of these DAOs that went to mainstream attention came to be known as the DAO with a capital T. Right before this DAO hack, you and your colleagues, please do feel free to mention names. I think it was Itai still, right?
No. For the DAO hack, it was Vlad Zamfir and Dino Mark.
Okay, so you, Vlad, and Dino are working together, analyzing the DAO. And you came up with some discoveries. Walk me through a little bit the process by which you kind of came to understand what you came to understand.
Sure. So the DAO is a digital autonomous organization. It's kind of like a venture capital fund. It collects money and then it makes awards to worthy projects. You come before the DAO with a proposal and then it funds you or it doesn't fund you depending on who how the token holders.
A software-based VC.
Exactly, a software-based VC fund. And we thought, hey, this is going to be a cool experiment. It's gonna be hopefully somewhat big, but we had no idea how big it was going to be. And so Vlad was in Ithaca at the time, and he said, hey, this thing might be very big, and it might be so big that if it has flaws in its design, it might actually pose a threat to Ethereum. So we should take a look at this. And so we started looking at how it was implemented. And it turns out it's incredibly hard to build a digital autonomous organization of this kind for running a VC, because people come before it with all sorts of proposals. There's a voting process. There are all sorts of details of that voting process that are completely gameable. And so we wrote down all of the attacks that we could imagine. And initially it was 6. I remember this very well. And we wrote a paper called A Call for a Moratorium on the DAO. We felt that these 6 flaws were really, really bad. And as we wrote the paper, we were working against the clock because the DAO had already started.
The DAO had raised 100 million, 160 million, 150 million by the end.
Yeah.
And did you publish this paper before or after they raised that money?
During the raise.
During the raise, you published them. Okay.
So at some point we realized, hey, this thing is really growing out of bounds, and it's going to be too big. And with these flaws,
it was a meaningful percentage of Ethereum's entire market cap.
15% or no, about 30% or so. Maybe.
So if it had gone down, it could have had
catastrophic consequences. Yeah. It would have been terrible. So I wrote this paper with Vlad and Dino, and we put it out on as a draft. It says call for a moratorium, and it named the 6 things, and then we came up with 3 more in real time. And I remember editing it in real time. In Google Docs, you see all these like anonymous viewers. So there's like artwork, whatever, bird, camera, all those like ABC names at the top. There are hundreds of people watching me type this academic paper with new flaws being added in. And it was really fun. And of course, nobody placed a moratorium on the DAO. And you know what happened. The rest is history.
Very quickly, just for the audience that doesn't know, in one sentence, what happened?
A hacker came in and took advantage of one flaw that we had almost discovered but decided not to put in the paper, and then took advantage of a second flaw that was in our paper. So combining 2 flaws, he ended up stealing $53 million at the time, which was of a significant portion of the Ethereum outstanding, and then there was a huge discussion on how to recover. Ethereum had to hard fork and so on.
And I'll briefly recap that because I want to get to news of day.
Sure.
So the end result of the DAO hack was basically 2 blockchains. One called Ethereum Classic, where the hacked money, some people consider it the stolen money, was still in the hacker's wallet. There was consensus formed among a meaningful percentage of people that thought that money should be moved from the stolen money into the original wallet. And that version of the blockchain became what we now consider Ethereum. In other words, there were 2 cryptocurrencies that were created out of this. Well, one cryptocurrency that was created out of this debacle. What did, very brief, and I can only imagine the answer to this question could be hours long, but very brief, when you look at, the paper that you wrote, exposing selfish mining, when you think about the papers that you wrote regarding the DAO, what are 1 or 2 lessons that stood out to you that made you think, you know what? I don't think we can fix the existing blockchains. I think I'm going to do one of my own.
Sure. Let's go through them. There are
Please.
So many lessons. First of all, the DAO hack was all about, is code law? or what's law. And really, code is buggy, and the law must, or rather not the law, but blockchains must serve the interests of the people. So that was, I think, the main outcome of the DAO hack and the hard fork that came afterwards. These systems are only useful to the extent that they serve their population. We're not beholden to any algorithm. We're definitely not beholden to any bug that was encoded in the code by mistake. That's one outcome. I think people understand that now, that these systems can and will be changed if they stop serving their constituents. The second thing that came out was that the state of software for blockchains was incredibly primitive, that we don't know how to write non-buggy code, that we need better tools to come in. I worked hard to bring in my colleagues and academics who work in program verification with their tool sets.
They were still using the kind of Facebook mantra, move fast and break things.
Who was?
They were the DAO developers and a lot of the other early smart contract authors were launching code, let the public due diligence it. If it breaks, we'll fix it. And the DAO kind of taught the world that you can't do that.
That you can't test in production. Did it really teach the world? I don't know.
That's a good point.
This world is a little hard of hearing. But,
so those are two great examples of lessons. I'm sure there are many more. But let's go ahead and skip ahead to what you decided to do. So you made the leap. When did you make the leap to go from being, quote, just an academic, and I put that in big air quotes because you were much more than just an academic, to founding a company and trying to do something firsthand? Sure.
So following the DAO hack, I think, I would say the third thing that came out of the DAO hack that ended up with me starting Avalanche was that I realized how primitive the general state of blockchains were. We had Bitcoin, we had Ethereum, so some of the foundations were established maybe, and the promise had been proven, but the systems were slow. They did not scale. And if you can't scale, you just can't go to the next billion users. You'll always be a little toy. So for me, the big challenge was, how do we make these things scale? How do we take it out of the realm of a bunch of enthusiasts, a bunch of dropouts, a bunch of young kids who don't know what they're doing, to the realm of, let's take over the way Wall Street does finance. So that jump is significant. So there were a couple of things that stood out, but two are really important. One is, what's the right protocol level mechanism for really fast transactions? That wasn't clear. Bitcoin was taking an hour. Ethereum was taking about half an hour to finalize transactions. It was proof of work back then. So can we do better than that without compromising decentralization? So that was one open question. And the second one for me again was, look, there are all these constituents to any blockchain, and they all have conflicting needs and desires. And some of them are legal constituents, people with guns, and they say you must do this. And so you can't possibly appease all of them at the same time on a single chain. So how do we come up with systems that can potentially address that? So that's what led me to Avalanche.
So I would love to talk to you about the consensus mechanism, but I don't think that's what our audience is here for. For those that want to research more, though, the name Avalanche comes from the consensus mechanism that you ended up creating, right? This was a product of your own company or yourself personally.
So we ended up implementing the Avalanche protocol. So the initial paper came from a collaborative effort.
So what I do want to talk about, though, and to the what is Avalanche question, are subnets. So very briefly, sort of like, what is a subnet, and how can entrepreneurs around the world, developers that are looking to explore blockchain, use a subnet?
Great question. So Avalanche is a latest generation blockchain, and it has this architecture based on what we call subnets. Subnets are unique, custom purpose, custom designed blockchains for a specific purpose. So what does that mean, and why might you need it? If we go back, just so that everybody has the right context on what's what, we have systems like Bitcoin, which are single asset, single chain systems. They do one job, they do it incredibly well. We have systems like Ethereum, which are multi-asset but single chain systems. There's only one Ethereum, and it's designed it's supposed to meet the needs of the world, but it's very hard to do so. Systems like Avalanche are different. not only is the consensus protocol much, much, much faster than everyone else's because it uses something that nobody else is using, not even Ethereum 2 with its proof of stake protocol. So not only is the consensus protocol faster, but it has a different architecture. It's not a single chain.
Yeah.
Multi-asset, multi-chain.
Yeah.
Each and every one of the chains can be completely different from the other. They're isolated from each other. Congestion on your chain does not impact me. High fees for you does not impact me. So that allows us to be able to accommodate jurisdictional differences. If you want to have an American chain subject to American rules, we can have that at the same time as a European chain subject to GDPR and myriad others.
But we may have to go a little bit into the consensus mechanism itself, but I do want to make sure that we at least address the elephant in the room, that in spite of all of these subnets have essentially being micro blockchains capable of supporting individual assets, it is a single consensus mechanism that is reconciling the transactions across these different blockchains.
Absolutely. Think of Avalanche ecosystem as a giant umbrella under which there are many different chains. Some are proceeding very slowly because they're not doing anything demanding. Some are going at an insane clip. Maybe there's a game on them. Maybe there's some highly demanding DeFi application. There's a DEX, etc., and everything in between. So we are at the moment when I talk to you, I think we have about 6 chains that are in production with hundreds that are being staged right now.
And let's talk about the Avalanche ecosystem itself from a business perspective. So there are at least 2 organizations that I know of. There may be more: Avalanche Labs and Avalanche Foundation.
Yeah.
Are there any others that we should throw out there? And very quickly, what do they do?
Oh, there's a gazillion companies in the Avalanche
Well,
ecosystem.
no, I'm sorry. Specific to like the creation team, to your team.
Yeah, and there are many companies I'm involved in as well. But,
Okay.
Well, let me just sort of lay out the land.
Yeah,
the only
please.
thing that matters is the Avalanche Foundation, and that's the sort of steward of the entire ecosystem. But the foundation is sort of a neutral body, and it's not in the business of writing software itself. It finds people who carry out different tasks and contracts them for it.
Okay.
Ava Labs is a for-profit company that I founded here, and it's the company that developed the initial software. So that's why people think that it has a special place, but it doesn't really have a special place in the ecosystem. So Ava Labs has been building the software for the system, and the foundation then steers the ecosystem.
And there's a difference between the AVAX market cap and the total liquidity. That's the money that the foundation has to kind of like invest in starting, helping jumpstart the ecosystem.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
great.
yes.
And for our entrepreneur watchers out there, if they are interested in building on the Avalanche blockchain and want to kind of tap into some of those resources, what's the process that they can go about doing that?
Oh, they can do, I think the easiest one is just get connected to our Discord, start talking to our community members, start talking to other people in the Avalanche ecosystem. Come to the Avalanche Summit in a few weeks in Barcelona, one of the most festive events in the crypto space, and one of the most fun, and just it finds just the right balance of technical, business, and fun. So yeah, those are good starting points.
I do want to talk a little bit about the activity that's going on top of the blockchain now. You mentioned, or the blockchains, I should say.
Yeah, multiple.
You mentioned 5 dozen? Approximately. I was listening to some podcasts kind of in preparation for our call, and there were a couple mentions about the attractiveness of the bridge between Avalanche and Ethereum. First of all, what is the bridge? And from a development perspective, why is that proving to be so attractive to coders?
Sure. Look, let me answer it at a high level, and then we can delve down to the bridge itself. My entire existence in this space is all about bringing the best of scientific knowledge to the blockchain world. So I came into this, I left my tenured position at Cornell because I felt that the space wasn't moving forward fast enough, that people didn't really know enough about the potential technologies they could use. So not only did we innovate on the front of the consensus protocol, not only did we come up with the world's fastest consensus protocol, but we also came up with the world's most secure bridge technology. It uses trusted execution environments. Essentially, some people might know these as hardware security modules. They're used in banks. Think of them as It's not exactly right, but think of it as a lockbox in which a computer resides, and you cannot touch the software. Now, it turns out the lockbox doesn't have to be ironclad. We could use virtualization techniques to make it actually happen in silicon. But that's the model you should have. I give you a lockbox, and you can't get your fingers in it, but you can send messages into it, and you can get messages out of it. So that's how we built our bridge, and it has the number one. It's the world's largest bridge in terms of TVL. It's never been hacked.
Total value locked.
Total value locked in the bridge, and it's been functioning ever since we deployed it. It's been functioning flawlessly.
So I did do some research trying to find out like if there are reliable counts of developers on the platform. Couldn't find anything that immediately jumped out to me. I know it's difficult with open source software. Is there any sort of like idea about activity on the Avalanche blockchain? We can talk about transaction volumes if you'd like. We can also talk about developer counts, but just to give us an idea of, you know, where the blockchain is at from a usability perspective.
Oh, we're growing insanely. So we just reached, we broke another record just a day ago. So we expect to break another one today, where the monthly active users on the chain is just going through the roof. So that's, I think, the only way to measure these things. When people talk about developers, they typically try to measure the number of people who've tried to contribute to the base system. That number is meaningless, right? You know, who cares how many people had their hands in Windows operating system, right? That's not where the activity is. How many apps are there for Windows? That's the question you should ask.
So let's talk about one specific app, because I logged in on Twitter today and saw that you retweeted this app. And I couldn't help but notice a little bit of similarity between the app's name and your name. What is the app? Is it a coincidence? Is there any connection there?
That's a coincidence. Okay, the app's name is Gunzilla.
All right.
And it's from a team in Germany and also in Ukraine. And Gunzilla is a AAA game. And they invited me out to Frankfurt recently, and I went out there. And they had a surprise planned. And they ended up, it's just so ridiculous, but I ended up getting into a suit and getting 3D scanned in my face, hands, fingers everywhere. And so now there's a model of me inside the game, and it says a whole bunch of things. I've become an NPC.
That is cool.
So now for me, you can say something like it's such an NPC, and you would be right. And if you're upset at me, you can take your gun and shoot at me all day long. I won't die, but I'll probably suffer in the game.
The virtual version, please. The virtual version
will end up taking a lot of bullets, but it's an amazing game. Absolutely mind-blowing.
So the idea of games on a blockchain, I think, has a lot of people's imaginations kind of churning to understand. Like, what's going on there? Why do you think the game space on blockchain is so important?
Okay, there's so much to say. I'll try to make it brief and well organized. First of all, what we're talking about isn't an ordinary game. This is a AAA game. So when you enter into this universe, it's amazing. It's so well designed. The architecture was obviously done by a bunch of architects.
Yeah.
But you know, with using, like, they don't actually care about the costs because it's all virtual. So they've designed amazingly ornate landscapes. Some of it is run down, and some of it is just insanely futuristic. And the characters are done by people who know how to build robots, how to build mechs, and so forth. So I don't want to spoil too much about the game, but that aspect of it alone is just made me wonder, you know, all these architecture students, why would you want to deal with concrete when you can build stuff like this? This is what you really grew up to want to do. This is where the action is.
Now, to be just a little skeptical here, I was doing a little research on this because the gameplay idea seems like a no-brainer for adoption.
Okay.
They're literally talking about gamifying as a way to get adopters, like in every industry on the planet. So of course, if you have software that can let you write a game, you know, that makes sense as a good way to get people on board. But you know, one of the biggest players in the space, Axie Infinity, was a peak at $159 and is currently at $9. What are we seeing with blockchain game usability, adoption? Like, is there some real stuff going on there, or did we see some?
There's so much going on. The early adopters, the early games that you see, forget about them. It takes 5 years to build a good game, like a high production value, like AAA game. The things I saw, I talked about the architecture, the gun design. So for Gunzilla, they ended up hiring much of the team from Call of Duty. And so I met the main guy, and he looks exactly how you would imagine a gun designer to look, and an amazing, brilliant fellow. And so they have the world's most futuristic, coolest stuff. And bringing all of this together is this blockchain infrastructure. And that infrastructure is there to do a bunch of things. One, it creates a marketplace for in-game goods. Two, it makes that marketplace open to all, democratic. And that's really exciting. Now maybe perhaps you can begin to extend the game on which you're playing. Three, it gives you assurance that even if the game were to be discontinued or what have you underneath you, there would still be the opportunity to keep on playing, that your investment in this thing has a lifetime outside of the creator. And that, I think, is amazing, right? You've created a different universe that now lives on its own.
Emin, it was such a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for coming to join us. As always, learned so much.
Thank you so much, Michael.